Morning, scholars. Happy Thursday. Today we're going on to Chapter 6 of The Wind in the Willows. All you'll need is a pencil and a skills packet if you have some extra time, and by the end of today you will turn in Thursday, September 17th, ELA. Our chapter today is called Dolce Domum, and this just means home sweet home. So you might already have an idea of what could happen in our chapter today. Today, we're going to identify key themes in a story and describe how characters in the story demonstrate these themes. We'll work on our read aloud, and we'll take the beginning of the year assessment part 2. And then today, to wrap up, you will have some independent reading if you're not in the live lesson. If you're in the live lesson, you don't need to repeat this. But if you're learning asynchronously, this is going to be independent reading, and it can count towards your 30 minutes of reading every day. And we're going to start reading Aladdin today. So that'll be really exciting for you to finish up your lesson with. So let's launch into our vocabulary words. Today, you do not have slides to fill out, just like yesterday, because you do have the Google form to finish when we're done. So you don't need to pull up anything. You're just focused on the video. Our first word today is reproached. Say it. Reproached. And this means scolded or corrected and expressing disapproval or blame. So you could say reproach, reproaches, or reproaching. And our second vocabulary word is subtle. So this is faint, delicate, or slight. So in these two pictures, there are subtle differences between the two. You would have to look really closely to find them. So before we launch into our story today, let's see if we can summarize the plot so far. First, Mole and Rat take an adventure on the riverbank. Then, Mole agrees to stay with Rat after he accidentally knocked them out of the boat. They go to see Toad, and it doesn't go well. His caravan tips over because of a motor car. Finally, Mole ventures into the wild wood on his own and gets scared and lost. So, Rat has to come find him. Then they go and see Mr. Badger. So they find his house, and Mr. Badger is extremely hospitable to them, invites them to stay, and feeds them. And then we wrapped up our story yesterday with Mr. Badger helping them find their way out of the wild wood via one of his tunnels instead. So our chapter today again is Dolce Domum, home sweet home. Not long after their adventures in the wild wood, the Rat and Mole found themselves plodding silently along a country lane. The rapid nightfall of mid-December had already descended upon them. The Mole was thinking of supper as he followed obediently behind Rat, leaving the guidance in the darkness entirely to him. As for the Rat, he was walking a little way ahead, as was his habit. He walked steadily with his shoulders humped, his eyes fixed on the straight gray road in front of him. This is why he did not notice poor Mole when suddenly something soft and subtle carried gently upon the cool night air, causing the Mole to stop dead in his tracks. It was one of these mysterious sensory moments that suddenly reached the Mole in the darkness. It made him tingle through and through with his familiar appeal, even though he could not clearly remember what it was. So what do you think a sensory moment is? If you've ever been in a sensory room, you might remember there were dimmed lights, maybe some tactile things to play with. So a sensory moment is anything that lights your senses. So it could be a smell, a sight, a sound. These are things that we feel with our senses. So he senses something, and it's making him tingle with familiarity. Having stopped suddenly in the pitch black of the night, his nose searched hither and thither in an effort to recapture the vague scent that had so strongly moved him. A moment, and he had caught it again, and with it this time came recollection in its fullest flood. Home! The essence of which had wafted through the air. Why, it must be quite close by him at that moment. His old home, the one he had forsaken and never sought again, that first day he found the river. So it's been a while since Mole has been back by his home. He was spring cleaning, and then he threw down his brush and he burrowed his way out of his house. And he ran into Rat when he may have not intended to leave his home. But Rat had this exciting life, and he decided to stay with him for a while. And he's been away from his home since the spring, and it's now winter. So it's been months and months since he's been back to his old home. And now it was sending out its scouts and its messengers to capture him and bring him in. So this is the author's way of saying that the scent is acting like Mole's scouts looking for him, and like messengers bringing them the message, come home. Since his escape on that bright morning, Mole had hardly given it a thought. So absorbed was he in his new life with all its pleasures, surprises, and captivating experiences. Now, with a rush of old memories, how clearly it stood up before him in the darkness. Shabby indeed, and small and poorly furnished, and yet it was his. It was the home he had made for himself, the home he had been so happy to get back to after a day's work, and the home he had been happy with him too, evidently, and it was missing him and wanted him back. So Mole's feeling a little bit sad right now. And we discussed a sensory moment is something that you perceive with your senses, and in this moment he's perceiving his home in the darkness. The call was clear, the summons was plain. He must obey it instantly and go. Ratty, he called, full of joyful excitement. Hold on, come back. Oh, come along, Mole, do, replied the Rat cheerfully, still plodding along. Please stop, Ratty, pleaded the Mole in anguish of heart. You don't understand. It's my home, my old home. I've just come across the smell of it, and it's close by. I must go to it. I must. Oh, come back, Ratty, please, please come back. The Rat by this time was far, very far ahead, too far to hear clearly what the Mole was calling. He was also too far away to catch the sharp note of painful appeal in his voice. And he was much taken up with the weather, for he too could smell something suspiciously like approaching snow. So Mole is begging the Rat to stop. He wants to go and see his home, but Rat is trotting ahead, leading the way in the dark, and he doesn't want to stop because he knows it's going to start snowing soon. Mole, we mustn't stop now, really, he called back. We'll come for tomorrow, whatever it is you found, but I daren't stop now. It's late and the snow's coming on again, and I'm not sure of the way. So come on quick, there's a good fellow. And the Rat pressed forward on his way without waiting for an answer. Poor Mole stood alone in the road, his heart torn asunder, and a big sob gathering somewhere low down inside him. But even under such a test as this, his loyalty to his friend stood firm. Never for a moment did Mole dream of abandoning Rat. Meanwhile, the wafts of his old home pleaded and whispered to him. He dared not tarry long within their magic circle. With a wrench that tore his very heartstrings, he set his face down the road and followed submissively in the track of the Rat, while faint little smells reproached him for his new friendship and his forgetfulness. So Mole is extremely torn now. He really wants to go back to his old home, but Rat is leading the way on because he knows it's going to snow, and he didn't stop to see why the Mole was so upset and wanted to stop. Because Mole is a good friend to Rat, he decides to keep following him, and he feels reproached or scolded by his old home, as if his home could say, "How could you abandon me?" With an effort, he caught up to the unsuspecting Rat, who began chatting cheerfully about what they would do when they got back. In the midst of his descriptive fervor, the Rat failed to notice his companion's silence and despair. At last, however, when they had gone some considerable way further, he stopped and said kindly, "Look here, Mole, old chap, you seem dead tired, no talk left in you, and your feet dragging like lead. We'll sit down for a moment and rest. The snow has held off so far, and the best part of our journey is over." So the Rat is completely unaware that something is wrong with Mole. He didn't stop to ask. The Mole rested forlornly on a tree stump and tried to control himself, for he felt it surely coming. The sob he had fought with so long refused to be beaten. Up and up it forced its way to the air, and then another, till poor Mole at last gave up the struggle and cried freely and helplessly. He's extremely upset, and he's been trying to hold back tears, but now that there's nothing else distracting him, they've stopped and sat down. He can't fight it anymore. He's too upset. The rat, astonished and dismayed at the violence of Mole's grief, did not dare speak for a while. At last he said, very quietly and sympathetically, "What is it, old fellow? Whatever can be the matter? Tell us your trouble, and let me see what I can do." Poor Mole found it difficult to get any words out between such heavy sobs. "I know it's a shabby, dingy little place," he sobbed forth, and at last brokenly, "not like your cozy quarters, or Toad's beautiful hall, or Badger's great house. But it was my own little home, and I was fond of it, and I went away and forgot all about it, and then I smelt it suddenly, on the road when I called, and you wouldn't listen, Rat, and everything came back to me with a rush, and I wanted it. Oh dear, and you wouldn't turn back, Ratty, and I had to leave it, though I was smelling it all the time. I thought my heart would break. We might have just gone and had one look, Ratty, only one look. It was close by, but you wouldn't turn back, Ratty, you wouldn't turn back. Oh dear. Recollection brought fresh waves of sorrow, and sobs again took charge of him, preventing further speech. The rat stared straight in front of him, saying nothing, only patting the Mole gently on the shoulder. After a time he muttered gloomily, "I see it all now. What a pig I have been. Just a pig, a plain pig." He waited till Mole's sobs became gradually less stormy and more rhythmical. He waited till at last the sniffs were frequent and sobs only intermittent. Then he rose from his seat, and remarking carelessly, "Well now, we'd really better be getting on, old chap." And with that, Rat set up off the road they had just traveled upon. Wherever are you going, Ratty?" cried the tearful Mole, looking up in alarm. "We're going to find that home of yours, old fellow," replied the rat pleasantly. "So you had better come along, for it will take some finding, and we shall want your nose." Or in other words, Rat needs Mole's strong sense of smell to find the quarters. So Rat is feeling pretty terrible now. He didn't realize what he had done. He just wanted to get home, and he wasn't paying very close attention to what Mole was feeling. And in doing so, he really hurt Mole, because Mole wanted to go see his home, and he didn't want to be a bad friend, so he didn't. He stopped and he kept going with him. So now Rat, feeling terrible, decides they've got to go find his home. "Oh, come back, Ratty, do," cried the Mole, getting up and hurrying after him. "It's no good, I tell you. It's too late and too dark, and the place is too far off, and the snow's coming. And I never meant to let you know I was feeling that way about it. It was all an accident and a mistake. And think of the riverbank and your supper." "Hang riverbank and supper too," said the rat heartily. "I tell you, I'm going to find this place now if I stay out all night. So cheer up, old chap, and take my arm, and we'll soon be back there again." Still snuffing, pleading, and reluctant, Mole suffered himself to be dragged back along the road by his companion. When at last it seemed to the rat that they must be nearing the part of the road where the Mole had been held up, he said, "Now no more talking business. Use your nose, and give your mind to it." They moved on in silence for some little way, when suddenly the rat was conscious, through his arm that it was linked in Mole's, of a faint sort of electric thrill that was passed down the animal's body. Instantly he disengaged himself, fell back a pace, and waited. The signals were coming. Mole stood a moment rigid, while his uplifted nose, quivering slightly, felt the air. So he was standing still. Then a short, quick run forward, a halt, a check, a try back, and then a slow, steady, confident advance. So the Mole was starting to get those sensory feelings back, and the rat could feel the Mole's arms maybe start to get goosebumps. He felt an electric signal up his arm. So we think he's about to find it. The rat, much excited, kept close to his heels as the Mole, with something of the air of a sleepwalker, crossed a dry ditch, scrambled through a hedge, and nosed his way over a field. Suddenly, without giving warning, Mole dived. But the rat was on the alert and promptly followed him down the tunnel to which his unerring nose had faithfully led him. So remember, Mole's home is underground. That's why it's not so easy to find. He has to smell it. Especially now that the snow has come down, it's harder to find. But it seems they did find it. So we'll see in the next chapter what happens now that they're back at Mole's home, but at least for today, they found it. So in the read aloud today, you heard that Mole and Rat were returning home after being out all day. On their way back home, with Rat leading and Mole following, Mole comes across something subtle. What was it? What did Mole notice? He had a sensory feeling. He caught the smell of his old home. So the smell of home was wafting through the air because they had just passed it, and that's what stops him. Why does Rat initially continue his advance toward his own home instead of stopping with Mole? So Rat doesn't hear the Mole as clearly as he should have because he's leading the way. And the Rat knows that it's going to snow soon, and if they stop for too long, they could get caught in it and get lost. So he's just trying to get them back to the riverbank. When Mole catches up with Rat, Mole breaks down into tears. Why? So he's so upset about his home and about passing it and not even looking at it. And the Rat, of course, is completely oblivious to this. He had no idea. But the Mole saw that Rat didn't care enough to stop, and that really hurt him. And he wished they could have stopped for just a moment to see his home. All right. So at this point today, you are on to your independent work, and you have 2 tasks today. Your first task is to finish this if it's been assigned to you. Not everyone will see it in their Google Classroom, so if for some reason you don't see this in your Google Classroom, that's okay. That means it hasn't been assigned to you. So not everyone will go on to this assessment today, and that's fine. If you have this in your Google Classroom assignment today, you will finish reading through this passage and then answer the questions below. Take your time and do your best independently. This is not something that you should receive help on. This isn't something where someone else should read the story to you. You should read it to yourself and do the best you can independently, because that's going to tell me how well you can do on this, not someone else. So it's not for a grade. It's just for me to get some information about how well you can read and understand this story. You'll find that Google form under your classwork, week 2. It'll be under the Thursday, September 17th ELA assignment description. Click on the Google form if it's there for you and complete it. After you are done with the Google form, you will also see the chapter pages linked in here. So this is the story of Aladdin that I was telling you. You're going to read independently at the end of today. This reading can count as your independent reading, where you're supposed to read 30 minutes each day. You're just going to read the chapter. We're not going to have any questions or talk about it extremely much, but you are going to read it today. So if you are in class, we would read it as a group, but since you're not, you're going to read it independently. It'll be linked in the description for you. In the story today, you will see Aladdin. He's the main character. We'll see a tailor, someone who makes clothing. Merchants, someone who sells goods to make money. We'll also see magicians, people who do tricks or have powers. Treasure, something that's considered valuable. And we'll see the word glittering, which means sparkling. And that's it. This is what the chapters should look like. So you're going to see it just attached inside Google Classroom. It'll say Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. You're going to read it to yourself independently. So this is what it'll look like, and you're going to do that once you're done with the video. Once you've finished reading the chapter, and if you were assigned the Google form, then you're going to turn it in. And again, you're just completing the Google form if it was assigned to you, reading the passage and answering the questions below it independently. And then you're going to read the chapter from Aladdin. And that's it. If you have any questions, please call or text me. Have a great rest of your day.